Is it possible to change the look of this painting and just improve it within a few minutes? That's what I'm going to attempt today, and I'm going to use glazing to do that. Glazing is really just a thin layer of paint that is suspended in a medium, and when we apply it in thin layers, we can darken the shadows and just give us that three-dimensional shape that got lost when we were putting in all the little details. And we can also change the color cast. In this case it's relatively yellow. I just want to put in a little bit more brown. So for glazing I'm only going to use 3 colors today. The one is phthalo blue, the other one is burnt sienna, and the last one is raw sienna. All 3 of them are quite transparent colors, and when I choose colors for glazing I always make sure that I choose transparent colors. At the moment I use mainly Winsor & Newton paints, and you get the oil colors, the artist oil colors, and you get the Winton oil color. The artist one has got more pigment in there, and for general painting I definitely find the process much faster because it's got better covering ability. The Winton has got less pigment, and for glazing I actually prefer the Winton in a lot of cases. So all 3 of these colors are from the Winton. There are different mediums that we can use for glazing. Today I'm going to use the liquid original from Winsor & Newton, and it's almost like a gel. So depending on what you want to accomplish with your glazes, you can use something like this. There are other mediums that are a bit more fluid as well. So I took a photo of my painting, and I just wanted to get an idea of what the painting is going to look like after I've glazed it. So I looked through all of the reference photos that I've taken before, and I found one that is almost in the same position as the painting that I'm working on now, and it's got the colors that I want to use. So I'm going to use this photo as my reference when I do the actual glazing on the painting now. Right, it's time to start with the glazing process. I've got my reference very close by, and what we're going to do first, we're going to mix a bit of the phthalo blue with some of the burnt sienna. So the more burnt sienna I put in there, the more brown it appears, and the thicker I apply this, the darker it's going to be. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with this area over here. That is too much burnt sienna, so what we're going to do is just apply a bit more of the phthalo blue. There we go. And during the process I'm going to step back quite frequently to have a look. So I can adjust this the whole time depending on the color that I want. So I'm going to go for the area like over there, and in this area I've got a tiny bit more of the burnt sienna compared to there, and I want it a little bit darker, so I'm going to go a little bit thicker. So after I've done this glaze, the painting is not going to be finished, but it's just going to give me a better basis when I do the rest of the painting to work from. So like I said, the liquid original is quite thick, almost like a gel. So if you use some of the other mediums, it's going to be much more fluid. But I just decided to keep things simple and just stick to the liquid original. I use that for most of the rest of the painting process. So we've got lots of very interesting shadows and things here. So what's nice about oil colors, if that's not the right color, it's too thick, I can just use something and I can wipe most of that off. I want to go a little bit more blue there. Right, and then over here we want to give this a little bit of a three-dimensional shape. And in this area I want to add a tiny bit more brown, so going really thin and a bit more of the burnt sienna there. And then I just have to step back again and just see what does it look like. You can see it's making the colors a lot brighter as well. The phthalo blue is an extremely strong color. It can be a little bit tricky to work with, but it gives such beautiful glazes. It's one of my favorite colors. So this, we're going to make this all, that is a bit too thick, and that's when you use the gel medium. It's a little bit more tricky, but that's fine. Just going to fill that out a bit. And all of this is going to be in shadow. And when one is so close to the canvas, you can't really see exactly what you're doing. You don't get a big picture. So I'm going to step back again, have a look, and I'm going to have all of this in shadow as well. And you can see I just mix. I haven't used much of the raw sienna yet, but I just mix the colors as I go along. So this is still all shadow. So this little bit I'm going to put a really thin glaze on, because this is going to be like standing out a little bit more. And then I'm going to go dark over there again. So I'm sort of halfway with the painting at the moment, so I'm still going to put a lot of detail in here, and these are not going to be the final colors, but it's just really handy if I change this now to just have a better reference point to work from. So in this area I still need to put in a lot of little highlights. So the highlights are actually going to be much brighter than the brightest areas that I've got on there now. And I work in thin layers. I do a layer of I do a glaze, and then I do a layer with some detail, and then a glaze again. And then as far as the eyes are concerned, these eyes are very bright, so I have to dim that down a little bit. But what I'm going to do first, this eye is going to be in shadow. So I'm going to put some shadows in there. The eye still has a bit of work on there. And then there's going to be a little bit of light hitting the eye right at the bottom there, just over there. Going to make that a little bit darker up there. And I'm going to do the other eye now as well. Right, and then I'm going to start with this area here. I'm putting in a little bit more of the burnt sienna here compared to the phthalo blue, because it's getting that brownish tinge. And it's almost like I'm always using it like primary color. So my burnt sienna I use instead of red, my phthalo blue I use for blue, and my raw sienna I use for the yellow. So like I said, the photo that I'm using now as a reference for the glazing is not the exact reference photo that I used for my painting in the first place, but it's close enough to position of the line to be able to use that. Yeah, here we almost have a black, so I'm going to make that relatively dark. What I like about working in the thin layers, things doesn't have to be perfect in this layer, because I know I can always just change it with my next layer. And I'm all out of the liquid, so I'm going to just get a little bit more liquid before we go any further. Right, it has to add some more shadows at the bottom here. And in this area over here, I'm going to start using a bit of the raw sienna as well. So I temper that with the phthalo blue so it's not a very bright color. Yep, that's about the color that I want to add. And a line, the fur tends to be very blotchy, so I don't put just an even glaze. I try and have different colors on there. Sort of a bit of a shadow in this area, so I've added a bit more violet blue there. Okay, now I'm going to step back again now and just have a look. So if I go relatively dark with the phthalo blue and burnt sienna, I can create, with these two, I can create almost like a dark brown. And if I look down all the time, my reference is just next to me here. So after I've done these glazes, I'm going to go in again and add some more detail, and then I'll come and repeat the glazing process again, and that's just like a cycle until I'm happy with the way that the painting is. So in this area here, there's a little bit less brown, but there are some shadows. So I've added a bit more of the phthalo blue to just make it more like shadows and not like the brown color of the fur. Now I'm going to go into this area over here, and I'm going to add a lot more of the raw sienna. And in this area I see we've got a bit more of the burnt sienna, all that reddish brown, so I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna there. And the medium that I'm using at the moment, the liquid original, it's what we call a Alkyl Medium, and that's basically a fast drying medium. They are very strong, and even if you just use a very thin layer of paint, this is going to bind the paint to the canvas in a very strong way. Right, so let's see. This area we're going to go a little bit darker. I'm going to add a bit more phthalo blue. I'm going to just take my brush a bit more to the back, just so I can stand a bit further away from the canvas when I'm painting, just so I can have a better look and see what I'm doing. So when you glaze in general, it reduces the contrast a little bit, and when I looked at my painting, halfway painting, it had more contrast than the actual photo in the little details. So if that's reduced a bit, I don't mind. The contrast in general, contrast of the really black and the light areas, that's more in the reference photo, so that I'm going to increase, but the contrast, the local micro contrast, I'm going to reduce a little bit with this. Right, now there's a dark area just over here, so we're going to add a bit more phthalo blue, a bit more of the burnt sienna, and let's see. So with the mix that I'm using now, I can't get like a complete black with this one. So if there are areas later that I want to be really black, I'm going to have to add different colors for that. See, I do a little bit of mixing on my canvas as well. If I have too much blue, I sort of just mix it on the canvas, so I'm adding a bit more. And this area's got a shadow, so I'm going to go a bit thicker there. It would be interesting at the end of the video to see how many minutes it actually took us to do the glaze on this painting. And you can do glazes in different ways. Sometimes you will do that little micro detail with the glaze and try and sort all of that out. At this stage, what I'm trying to do is just get the general idea, the big shadows, get that in place where I would like that to be. I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna here, just to make it a bit more brown. A bit less blue. Go with there. Add even a bit more. Right. So what I try and do, I try and sort of go in the same direction as the fur whenever I can. Just so my little brush strokes, that will create the illusion of if I'm going in all kinds of other directions, it might not look quite right. I don't want to have an even glaze, so you'll see I work in like a little bit of extra burnt sienna there just to give it that extra brightness there. And what's nice about the glazing, say for instance I want to get some highlights out here, I can just wipe a bit of my glaze off. You can see that creates the illusion of some highlights there. It gives it that three-dimensional look. In general, when something is a bit lighter colored, it tends to stand out, and if it's dark, it tends to be a little bit deeper in. It's not always like that, but I'm sort of just talking in general terms. Right, and now on this area of the nose, we're going to use a lot more burnt sienna, but I don't want to go too strong with the burnt sienna either, just a tiny bit more. Yeah, lions are amazing animals. I've got all these little different colors. So I'm using a bit more of the raw sienna here. And the wind and the raw sienna from the wind really doesn't have very strong pigment in there. So for general painting it can be a bit frustrating because you just struggle so much to color the canvas. But if you want to do a really thin glaze, it's amazing because it doesn't tend to overpower your painting. When I use the oil color, the artist oil, the raw sienna, it is very overpowering. It's much more yellow than the raw sienna from the Winton. So I'm almost out of liquid again, so I'm just going to do this little bit. So when I do these little bits here, the pressure of the brush is really important. So I push a little bit harder, and then as I go to the tip of the little cluster of hair there, I lift it a little bit to just give that idea of it standing out a bit. So the brush that I'm using is quite a soft brush, and for me a soft brush is usually the one that works the best when I do a glaze. Great, so you can see there, I go a little bit harder there, and as I get to the tip of the tuft of hair, I just lift my brush a little bit. So it's not just a glaze like the same color all over the canvas. Alright, I'm going to go and get a little bit more of the liquid. So standing back, I could see that I need a bit more shadow in that area there. And with the glazes, you get to the point where you can't go much darker on the glaze. Add another layer of glaze without disturbing the deeper one. And in a case like that, I just let it dry, and then I work in a separate glaze afterwards. So I see in this area it's relatively dark, but it's like a brownish color. It's not very blue, so I've added a lot more burnt sienna there. And I'm actually going to add a bit of the raw sienna too, to give it that yellowish color. See, I'm going over all these whiskers and all of that. That's fine. I'll just touch up on those afterwards. I don't try and avoid them or anything like that. Alright. This area here, we want the mane to be look like it's a little bit deeper in there, so we have to go quite dark up there. See, I've got different colors on my brush. As I'm brushing, depending on what part of the brush I use, you can get a bit more of the burnt sienna or a little bit more of the phthalo blue coming through. So this one I'm going to add a bit more burnt sienna, a bit more of the raw sienna as well. This bit that is more closer to us, the bit of the mine up there, I'm going to use a bit more of the raw sienna, and I'm not going to put my glaze in very thick. One doesn't want that to be too yellow either, so when I do my final highlights, I'm just going to damp down a little bit on the yellow as well. So in these areas I use a fair amount of both of the colors. Again, I try not to apply like an even glaze. I have some areas that's got a little bit more of the burnt sienna coming through, for instance, like over there. Now this area here, there's not a big difference in color between the shorter hair here and the mane. This area needs to be deeper, so we have to make that darker. So I'm going to make this relatively thick, so I've got a mixture of the phthalo blue and the burnt sienna, and we're going to go a bit thicker there. So later on, when this layer of glazing is dry and I want to go even darker there, instead of burnt sienna, I'm probably going to use burnt umber to make this area really dark, to give it that 3D effect. So when you try and go too thick with your glaze now, and there's already another glaze on there, you tend to start wiping off that first glaze. So I'm just not going to go exactly as dark as I want in the final one. I'm going to hold my brush like this so I can have a really just a gentle brush stroke, barely touching the canvas, and that will help me to just put down some paint. So I see I'm getting that 3D effect there, and then there's a little area over here that is also quite dark. That's more because of the fur that is dark in that area, but that's fine. We can do that with the glaze as well. The lines tend to be very blotchy. In this area, the fur is sort of standing up, and then underneath here there's going to be a little bit of a shadow, so I'm just going to put in some shadow there. Right, I'm just going to make this a little bit more blotchy by putting in a bit of my darker colors there. Let's see. There are certain areas here where I definitely want to go much darker. And again, the brush control is really important. I push relatively hard, but when I get closer to the tip of the fur, I just lift my brush a little bit to try and give that 3D effect. Sometimes when I'm painting, it almost feels more like sculpting. When you do the darks, you push in, and with the lights you lift up. And there's a bit more shadow there, and it's got a bit more shadow there as well. Right. These areas in lines, most lines is always quite dark. So here I'm using quite a bit of the phthalo blue and the burnt sienna, not so much of the raw sienna. Raw sienna is really in the areas where I don't want the glaze to be too thick and I want it to be a bit more yellow. See, I can definitely go a bit dark there, but that's too much burnt sienna, so I'm going to add a bit of the phthalo blue. So what's also nice about a glaze, very often if you've used white, it tends to be quite chalky. And then when you do a bit of a glaze, it takes that chalkiness away. See, I'm almost out of liquid again. We're going through a fair amount of liquid here. But it is amazing with glazing how quickly you can change a painting. You don't necessarily have to use a glazing like I'm using it now for 3D shape. You can, sometimes if you've got a whole painting, you just want to give it another color cast and you go over with burnt sienna, and then your whole painting has got this warm color cast within a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to go and get a bit more of the liquid again. So we're going to go a bit darker there. Yeah, this phthalo blue, if you use it for shadows, it gives it such a beautiful transparent shadow. I see in the reference that I'm using for my glazing, there's a shadow in this area. And over there. got sort of a highlight there that we're going to try and preserve. I think in the end, when this painting, when it's closer to not finished, but as I advance with it, I'm probably going to use very light glazes in that area as well. But for now, I'm just going to leave that to give the idea of a highlight and the sun coming through there. I'm just going to put a really thin glaze on the lighter area there. And I'm going to put a little bit of glazing there. And then this area also needs to, so it's a lighter area of fur, but it's still in the shadow. So for this area I'm going to add a bit more of the raw sienna. This raw sienna has got an amazing, like creamy feel to it. Every pigment feels a little bit different. Right. With this bit I'm going to add a bit more of the raw sienna. A lot of lines will have a bit more of a brownish colour in the mine over here. Gonna add a bit more blue, that's a bit too much of the burnt sienna. Let's see. Yep, that's a better colour. Yep, okay. Bit more blue still. There you go. I'm trying to preserve my shadows between the little clusters of the mine here, so I don't go evenly with my glaze. And then the same here, I want to create the illusion of some deeper areas and shadows here as well. So in this area I want to go a little bit darker if I can. Alright. A bit more glazing there. Bit more shadow in that area. I think we're sort of getting there. I'm going to make this very blotchy and try not to go over my little tips of the fur. But for me it's better to use a slightly bigger brush. If I have a little brush, it's very hard for me to work on the big picture. I just get so bogged down on the little details. So one of the really dark areas in the painting is over here. So this is getting a little bit slippery now with my glaze that's already on here. So I'm not going to be able to do a huge amount more there. I'll have to wait for that to dry. Going to see in these areas here if I can thicken my glaze a little bit. Right. Right there. Right, I don't know what you think, but I think It's far from perfect, but it's definitely, I think, we accomplished quite a bit in these few minutes. So I'm going to give that time to dry, and then my next layer is going to be a bit more detailed before I do some kind of a glaze again. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'm going to do some follow-ups probably on this painting as well, and we'll see where this painting is going. See you next time.